Tardy here with Weather Echo, and we've got a big insight for you here. We're going to talk about a lot of things. So, in this type of video, feel free to scroll through to find the area you're most interested or review a certain area that you need more detailed information on. So, we have a late season monsoon, and that is going to affect fire weather conditions. So, depending on how much rain we get here in August, that could help the situation, even though lightning and winds from thunderstorms can cause new wildfires. We have record dry fuels right now, so we're going to talk about that. We have warm and dry conditions expected for the most of the fall and early winter. And then, of course, Santa Ana winds will be a factor as well. So we're going to talk about those, including the climatology of them. Thanks for joining. All right, we're going to give you an outlook for the fall and winter of 2025-2026. These are some of the topics we're going to cover: weather and human health, extreme precipitation, excessive heat, wildfire, Santa Ana winds, air quality, and of course a little bit of climate change. So again, in this video, feel free to scroll through the section you're most interested in. That may be the outlook. That may be information on Santa Ana winds. So enjoy. Okay, FEMA has identified Southern California as the highest risk area. And this is largely due to drought, wildfires, Santa Ana winds, and floods, and because of our large population that is susceptible. So a little bit of weather goes a long way in Southern California. You can see there's not many areas. Florida is one, for example, because of tropical cyclones. With Aaron going up the coast, nor'easters and tropical cyclones are a threat for the high populated areas of the East Coast. Okay, we're going to talk about precipitation a little bit because that's what everyone wants to know about the upcoming winter or any winter. Now, right off the bat, what's important to know is that precipitation in California can be heavy at any time during the winter season. During the normal cool season, it can occur in La Nina, it can occur in El Nino. Taking a look at the left-hand side, we've had some really recent wet years in San Diego alone and in LA that have been La Nina and El Nino. Then we've had a very wet La Nina and a very record dry La Nina just a few years apart. And don't forget the super El Nino that produced below average precipitation across all of Southern California. So when you look at past El Ninos or La Ninas, it's important to look at the actual impacts. La Nina, El Nino are not storms. They're not rain. They're not the jet stream. They're not precipitation. Our wettest winter in California history was a La Nina, as shown here. Our snowiest winter in California history, yes, was also a La Nina. So a wide variety of precipitation impacts and outcomes come out of La Nina or El Nino. Just like you can go to a pizza shop and get a wide variety of different types of pizza. So again, the wettest year recorded in California was a La Nina. And the snowiest, the biggest snowpack, which is essential for our water supply, was in a La Nina. Now, it is true, El Ninos have produced floods and really wet winters as well. Note here, La Nina winters can be very dry. I listed two of them here. These were record dry. But then I also listed three that were record wet or record snowfall. So precipitation in a La Nina year is highly variable, highly variable. We had two back-to-back La Ninas, and they were wet across Central and Southern California. In fact, one of them was record wet. So it is incorrect science to associate La Nina or El Nino with precipitation, with storms, with even wet or dry, because that's not how the atmosphere typically has worked. Now, the other issue we have in Southern California is not just Whether it's El Nino, La Nina, if they bring a lot of rain, a little bit of rain, it's drought. Our worst drought that's ever been recorded was between 2013 and 2016. In fact, that was ended by a La Nina in 2017, not by the Super El Nino. Now, currently we are in a drought again here in Central and Southern California, as shown on the far right. So drought is not unfamiliar to us, but we've really been through some significant breaking droughts. Now, when you look at temperature for these droughts, temperature is what really made the difference where the arrow was pointed on here. So that was a really warm period, but we've seen really warm periods even recently in 2020, 2021 across Southern California. In fact, 8 of the last 10 years in Southern California are the warmest annual years on record. Here's a depiction of the current drought. This information is updated and provided from the Drought Monitor. You can see there is drought across Southern California remaining after the dry winter. We'll talk a little bit about the details of the most recent winter and how this has led to critical fire weather conditions. Okay, one thing that we should note about precipitation and weather patterns, whether it is a La Nina, overall really doesn't matter. Look at 2017 weather pattern. That was the record snow year. Tremendous amount of rain and flooding in California. This image I'm showing you here is not one storm. This is the way the weather pattern averaged during the rainy season, an average. So this deep low pressure, this dip in the jet stream, that was prevailing through that entire La Nina winter. Now, the next year, we were still in La Nina, and we were replaced by a storm to basically an upper ridge or a block or a dry pattern. And that was just 1 year later. An extremely dry condition. So just after we entered the drought, we saw record-breaking dry conditions a year later. And both years were in La Nina. Now, it's also important to note when we talk about storm tracks and weather patterns and purple and red, we're talking about anomalies. We're not talking about, oh, it's winter, that's what it should look like. We're talking about the departure from the 30-year average. What is La Nina? Well, La Nina is normal, just like El Nino is normal. It's a shift in the winds across the equator, and it's a shift in the water temperatures. So what happens in the ocean is excessive heat builds in the western and central Pacific, and in order to relieve that heat, the winds shift because the pressure patterns shift, and that causes upwelling, and cooler water will eventually replace the warmer water. So it's a very normal cycle from warm to cool. It was discovered by fishermen along the South America coast because when water becomes cooler or warmer, you get different types of fish. Now, we track La Nina not a 1 day or a 1 week. It's actually several consecutive months how it's tracked. On the left-hand side, you see how La Nina is tracked. And so there's set criteria that identifies whether it's a La Nina or a El Nino. But El Nino, La Nina, they're not a storm, they're not precipitation. They are a condition of water temperatures in the ocean. Those water temperatures, when they can change pressure patterns, wind patterns, and in some cases, even the jet stream pattern, which brings us storms. Take a look at this here. Between a La Nina and an El Nino. So these 2 years are really important because they were extremely wet. They set the stage for a lot of growth and vegetation in central Southern California. The La Nina was record-breaking wet, 22-23. El Nino, 23-24, was also wet, but not as wet as shown here. We broke all kinds of records in that La Nina year of 22-23. But the bottom line is there's a lot of vegetation and fuel that grew. It grew across California over the past couple of years. Now, if we look at that one winter, that was a really wet, especially in a short period of time during the heart of the winter. But overall, the entire winter, as painted in blue and purple here on the right-hand side, was much above normal when you looked at the fall, especially December through February. Now, when we have a wet season, 23-24, we also track atmospheric rivers. And atmospheric rivers are critical. At least 50% of our precipitation in California comes from atmospheric rivers. But in order to get an atmospheric river, you have to have that storm track. You have to have that weather pattern to drive the storm and the moisture into your region. Impacts vary greatly from different types of atmospheric rivers. One of the biggest impacts in Southern California in 2024 was January 22nd, as noted here, and it was a very weak atmospheric river. So just like with El Nino and La Nina, where we can't associate it with a storm or precipitation, or even a normal, wet, dry winter, we cannot associate an atmospheric river and its impacts directly to its strength, not directly to its strength. Take a look at this. High impact rainfall in San Diego is shown here. Now in San Diego, different types of winters, different types of storms, and they've all occurred in either La Nina, El Nino, or neutral conditions. So they're not dependent on one or the other. And again, one of the biggest, most recent devastating floods was January 24, which was not occurring with a strong atmospheric river, but it was a weak one, and we did have a weak El Nino as well. But you can look back historically. We've also seen devastating significant flooding in La Nina, such as 2010, as shown here, such as December 2018, as shown here. And these flooding rains occurred in downtown San Diego. I'm not talking about a mountain or a desert or Northern California, downtown San Diego. Okay, what about the most recent winter, and why is this important? Well, our most recent winter is setting the stage for our fuel or fire conditions. The winter of 24-25 had modest expectations and turned out to be very dry. Not as dry as what we saw in 2017-18 or even back in 2007, but it was very dry compared to normal as shown here. The problem with this winter was we almost had no precipitation between November and January. We were off to our driest record start in terms of lack of precipitation in Southern California just last year, 24-25. Why? Well, the weather pattern could not shift over our region. It was going up and over us. It wasn't that there was less storms or more storms. It was the black line, the jet stream weather pattern was missing California. So we didn't have much precipitation. In fact, we set records through late January for the driest start to the water year ever recorded. Now, overall, the water year, we made up for it a little bit in March. And so instead of being record dry, we were about 50%, and in some cases still a little less than 50% or bucket half full in Southern California. So that has set the stage for our dry conditions here in summer 2025. Note that Northern California actually had a beneficial and above normal winter in terms of precipitation. Now, the wildfires, they've been erupting since last winter. Yes, since last winter, since last fall. But here are some of the recent big ones. Over 130,000 acres, the Gifford Fire. These did not occur as Santa Ana winds like we saw in January 25. These have occurred in normal summer type winds. And we've seen some explosive, large, aggressive growth due to the very dry conditions in place. Here's a photo of some of the fires from last year. This was September 2024. And 3 very large fires occurred in Southern California, even before the big fires of January 25. Remember the big fires of January 25, the Palisades, and the Eaton Fire. But before that, we had the bridge, the line, and the airport fires in Southern California in the fall, late summer, early fall of 24. Now, record dry fuels. Why are the fuels so dry? Well, we just went over most of the reasons, but when we get into heat waves in Southern California, like we're experiencing now in mid-August, and we already have conditions that are dry from a dry winter or limited monsoon, or in this case, both, when those temperatures, we bake the fuel with the temperatures, and Early August, as shown here, we had record-breaking dry fuels. And that could occur again in this current heat wave. The main difference in this heat wave is that we expect to get some monsoonal moisture to offset it. Speaking of the monsoon, it has not been around. So these values are going to change. But up until mid-August, up until now, we are seeing extremely dry conditions across California, the Great Basin, the Southwest. Really almost no monsoon activity. Now, fortunately, temperatures have been cooler than average across all of California and Nevada, but warmer than average in the Great Basin and Southwest and Pacific Northwest. Despite the warmer than average and the drier than average, compared to the cooler than average, not much difference. The fuel and the vegetation is so dry that even in the cooler conditions, we're seeing explosive, aggressive fire growth. Here's a reminder of what fires can do. This was a devastating, potentially could have been worse situation in Mountain High, Wrightwood, California. If it wasn't for the defensible space in this area, this fire in a non-Santa Ana wind, so yes, daily driven winds, this fire took on its own mind, exploded from 4,000 acres to 25,000 acres overnight on September 12th, roared through Wrightwood in the Mountain High ski area. Damage was significant, but it was minimized by considerable defensible space. That means they had areas where the fire would run out of fuel and not be as aggressive. The fire was burning at 9 o'clock in the evening on this date. 30 to 40 mile per hour winds. And those weren't Santa Ana winds. Those were winds induced and created by the intense heat of the fire itself. Now, the other issue we had last fall was not just the fires, but the air quality. And that's why we're also typically seeing double whammy when we have wildfires and forest fires. The air quality was off the charts at Big Bear City from the line fire burning up in that area. They were getting smoke actually from the bridge and the line at the same time. Now, I mentioned this before, wildfires have a strong association with hot temperatures, warm temperatures, and fuel that has been baked. Not just dry fuel, but fuel that's been baked. And we're seeing record temperatures in 24. In fact, July is the all-time hottest month in California history. But it carried into September, and we even had some records in October of last year. So our fuel conditions have suffered from intense heat, lack of monsoon moisture, and a really dry winter of 24-25. Now, we've seen this in past years, right? It's not new information. It's not just happening in 24-25. Back in 2020, when we had record-breaking back-to-back years with wildfire activity and record-breaking temperatures, we saw explosive fires, even without Santa Ana winds. An example, the Apple and the El Dorado. The air quality was horrendous as too many fires, large, out of control, were burning at once. You are able to track, predict where the smoke's going. There's a model that uses the atmospheric conditions. It's publicly available, and you can track where, once you know there's a fire, where that smoke is going to go. 2020 and 2021 not only set records with temperatures across California, only to be topped by 2024, they also set large wildfire activity. Take a look at this chart. In those 2 years alone, more than half of the acres burned, yes, occurred just those 2 years alone. And those were record hot years and summers. So when we worry about fires, we typically worry only about Santa Ana winds. Now, Santa Ana winds are a problem. Santa Ana winds are actually expected to decrease in the future because of global warming, lack of cold air over the Great Basin. Yeah, you heard me, lack of cold air. Santa Ana winds are driven by cold air. So when we go into this fall of 2025, it'll be important. If we don't get a lot of cold air, we could have a long delay in our Santa Ana season. That happened last year in 24-25. We got Santa Anas and they were horrific, but they didn't come until December and January. They came really late. And that is actually the normal peak for Santa Ana. It's not normal to have a lot of Santa Anas in October and November, and I'll show you. So Typically, December and January, historically, we see the peak in the occurrence or the amount of Santa Ana wind events and their intensity. And that was not absent last year. The devastating Santa Ana winds occurred in December and January of last year, right in line with what this research shows here. The research by UC San Diego Scripps and the U.S. Forest Service also show the importance of rain. Now, it might seem trivial to just say we're going to get a little bit of rain, fire season's over. But significant rain, including monsoon activity, can really help us in the fall and early winter. But like last year showed, and in 2017 showed, lack of precipitation or very little precipitation followed by warm conditions, followed by Santa Ana winds are devastating. So it's really important to have precipitation in the late summer and in the fall and even early winter. Now, significant rainfall greatly limits these fires. It's not like you don't have fires, but the large explosive fires are typically reduced most of the time when we have a widespread rain. Now, it's true, with a monsoon condition like we're seeing in August setting up here, that's not going to end the fire season. That's not going to reduce it significantly. But widespread rain across the area with a fall or early winter storm can really help significantly, as this research shows here. Okay, so what are we expecting? Now we get to the outlook part. So unfortunately, the big bullets are warmer and drier for September through January. Now, when we look at things closely here, we can see the warmth and the lack of cold air entering the United States is notable. So that could lead to limited Santa Ana wind events until we get deeper into the winter. You need that blue, that cold air, the dip into the Great Basin. That's how you get high pressure, and that's how you get offshore flow Santa Ana winds. But unfortunately, if you look in the fall and you go month by month, indications are that conditions will be dry, with the only exception I highlighted here as December. So we'll watch that closely with future updates. A potential wet December would be great for snowpack, great for fire weather conditions, and great for cooling things off. I picked 2 months here, October, November, to focus on a little more detail. Now, early indications are not much hope for early season precipitation. So dry, not just dry because it's fall, but drier than normal for October, November. If we look at temperatures, a warm fall, September, but here I'm highlighting October, November, warmer than normal conditions for actually most of the United States, with the cold air staying bottlenecked well up into Canada. Now, I picked 2 months here, September and December, to focus on the outlook. So some indications are showing dry for December, other indications are showing wet. So it remains to be seen exactly where that jet stream will set up in December. So even though it's easy to point at one computer model and say, okay, December is going to be wet like I showed you before, a few days later, that computer model, since you're predicting 3 months in advance, sometimes even more, changes. There's some consistency that an active weather pattern will set up in December, but exactly where that'll place is uncertain. So that's why we'll provide updates as we go through late summer and early fall. If you look at September through December, drier than normal for fall of 2025. That's the overall consensus, especially when you focus on October and November. So pretty good confidence of October, November, much less confidence if we'll jump into a very active West Coast jet stream pattern. Some indications of that in December, but recent indications have spread it a little further south. Temperatures, though, this is probably the more easy part of the prediction. A lot of indication that warmer than normal conditions this fall, all the way into early winter across most of the United States. Though, notice the December. So not a coincidence. We see wet conditions potentially setting up in December and a lot of cold air building up, colder than usual even, building up in December across Canada, with some of that spilling to the south. So the key will be getting on the right side of that jet stream or that storm track, because if we don't, then we set up like January 25, where we get cold air coming to the United States and we get the Santa Ana dry side. Hope you found this useful. Go through certain material that you're interested in. We'll provide updates as we go forward into late summer and fall. Most of the data that I showed you, especially the long-term predictions, some of them are updated daily, some are updated weekly, and some monthly. So there's always new data coming in. We'll post on our blog, so be sure to sign up on our blog for more real-time information like the monsoon, like Santa Ana winds, heat waves, and we'll also post information in real time on X. All right, everyone, thanks for joining the latest weather and climate update and the outlook for fall and winter 25-26.